Wizards of the Coast finally confirmed it. We're getting changes to the Modern and Pioneer format come Monday, December 4th. It's been a long time coming, and they have confirmed 100% without a doubt we will see changes. And we see this evidence by a live stream that they just had earlier today. From twitch.tv, from the weekly MTG stream, we have two members of the Wizards of the Coast design team just talking to our usual host, bringing us some insight into their thoughts on the BNR and just how they approach different formats. Now, this is a channel primarily focused around Modern with a splash of Pauper in there, so I won't be discussing any of the conversation they had around older formats like Legacy or Vintage, or even the discussion around Pioneer. There's obviously a lot going on in terms of the new Discover strategy going around, with Mono Green Ramp obviously being around the format for a while. So if you're interested in that, you have your YouTubers for that. But for here, we want to talk about the changes to the Modern format that have been required for a very long time. And many of you are already upset with me how much I parrot the need to change the scam deck. And to you, I say, I don't care. If you don't agree with me on whether or not scam needs to be banned, so be it. I can't change your mind. You're wrong in my eyes, honestly. And scam has been needed to change for a very long time. I don't care to adapt. I'm not going to be sat here and be in a world where a deck representing over 20% of the metagame is okay and somehow all y'all are justifying it. That's your problem. I want scam to be gone, and we have that confirmation finally. And the real evidence behind what is going to change, I'm going to talk about in a little bit, and some of the things that they've discussed I want to highlight. So firstly, they talk about how fun is subjective, and this is where obviously that little rant I just went on is very important. The decks I play and the things I enjoy obviously are very heavily affected, and I acknowledge my own bias in that. The fun is very subjective, and so people winning with scam are maybe having fun. People may be winning with something that beats scam, maybe like Amulet Titan has been doing relatively well recently. They're having fun in their own sense, and their level of fun is going to change. And so that's good to know that they address that. And then also the timing of things, talking about how they've been monitoring Rakdos mid-range winning the Pro Tour, and then slowly seeing how the meta evolves, seeing if people can adapt. And unfortunately, they also addressed that people didn't adapt. They just went along with playing what wins. If you can't beat them, join them. And so they finally see it fit to make that change. It's nice to see December 4th. We're going to get that. They notably refer to Fury in many ways. They talk about how X1s can't see changes in the format, talk about how two different decks like the Cascade deck and whatnot are going to see a change uniformly. So it seems highly likely, based on other conversation pieces, again, that stream is going to be linked down below, they are going to ban Fury. And I'm really happy for this, just off the fact that this card single-handedly holds back so much of the format. And I'm not saying that those parts of the format would necessarily solve the top, but it would provide a variety that those decks now need to answer. You can't get away with just answering the top of the metagame. You have to answer everything else, especially with the prevalence of cards like Tishana Tidebinder that have been coming up recently in the blue decks. It's going to be very important for a diversity in the metagame, and so not everyone is just beating scam or just beating everything else. So with that in mind, we see cards like Thalia, Guardian of Thraben potentially making a comeback, addressing a lot of the non-creature spells in the format, like in the Cascade decks, and potentially seeing a comeback of decks like Taxes. Now, there's obviously reasons why this deck can't come back, and I am going to address that later in the video, but notably we are going to see a comeback of creature decks. Now that Fury isn't here, we have some breathing room. Solitude is still going to be around. We still have some other answers, which honestly might just keep the format, these creature decks back. But hey, breathing room is breathing room. It's important that Fury is gone. And with that, I think it's important that Fury is the card that gets banned. I think it's a high mistake to address Grief in any way, shape, or form. I think Grief is fine as a 3/2 menace. It is the only option to Thoughtseize yourself away. It is obviously a part of the annoying part of the play pattern, but if it's the only part of scam that scams you, that's fine, because that greatly reduces the amount of consistency you have if Fury is gone. You're scamming one creature versus doing so with others. And so this deck is going to see many points being shifted down, and I don't think this deck disappears, honestly. I think there's still a lot of playability, there's still a lot of range. I think we're going to see 4-ofs, more so 3/4-ofs kind of highlight the deck. We're still going to see potentially the scam archetype work. We still see it in Legacy, of course, and so Grief is still going to be around, but it's not going to be 20% of the metagame. We're going to see other players rise to the top, and hopefully this is enough to address things as we look for another long wait going into Modern Horizons 3, as they've also addressed that the next ban window is likely going to be on March 6th, approximately 4 to 5 weeks after Murders at Karlov Manor gets released. That is a really long time. We're going to be waiting 3 to 4 months at this point for a new BNR update. So this format better be solved, and I hope so in many ways it is, although we have some problems that might have to address later on. Now, we are going to see the moments of creature decks coming back. The top deck Mantis Rider, where, you know, not only is Grief taking away your hand, but the natural kind of solution to top decks, the Thoughtseize bug, if you will still be prevalent, where you can still top deck your way into an insane answer, which is how many ways that Tron was a great competitor against the scam deck, because it doesn't really care. You can't Thoughtseize away their lands, and so they will just naturally play Tron, they will top deck a card the Great Creator, and they will take you from there. So Tron had a lot of solutions to this, and so I highlight Mantis Rider just as something that you top deck, you Vigilance Haste, and this is a great option for creature decks to come out with. But creature decks still have a very big problem, which is why I hope that it's not just Fury being answered. I hope that it's other cards as well, as I want to talk about some of the other problematic spells in the modern format that are going to see a rise, other strategies, and how in general the modern format is going to change moving forward. And I think it's important to address that, because now that the diversity is going to open up, you have to understand that Modern Horizons and the Lord of the Rings set is still going to rear its ugly head. And we see that with the Orcish Bowmasters of it all. Orcish Bowmasters is going to be a big reason why X1s are still not viable. Thalia Garden of Thurman, the example I specifically picked, gets answered by Fury, but also gets answered by Orcish Bowmasters and other X1s that are prevalent throughout. So we're still having the problem of Orcish Bowmasters still being in print, the Lord of the Rings Tales of Middle-earth set still being sold, especially with the anniversary, or not the anniversary, the holiday set coming around. And so it's important to see that this is still going to be around. They are not going to be touching Orcish Bowmasters. If they do, that is the craziest, most player positive thing that they ever done, but it would be a big hit for WOTC sales. They're not going to touch it. Orcish Bowmasters is still going to be a big reason why the scam deck probably prevails in many ways, but we'll see what happens. Ren and 6 potentially could make a comeback, because Ren and 6 was being held back in many ways by, well, Orcish Bowmasters being one, but also Fury as well. They uptick with the Ren and 6, Fury comes down and answers it. And honestly, with Beanstalk, you just don't need this level of value sometimes. The Ren and 6 just isn't around, because you can just play the One Ring, play Beanstalk, and draw your way through everything. You're going to draw all the lands you need. You don't need to recur them, because that's not the type of game that you're playing. Not a lot of decks are playing playsets of Lightning Bolt anymore, playsets of Prismatic Ending, cards that usually want to recur with Ren and 6. We aren't really seeing that, because the answers that we have are now in our creatures thanks to Modern Horizons, and no longer in our instants and sorceries. Our protection spells are now our artifacts that also draw our cards. So Ren and 6 may make a comeback, but I don't think it's going to make the game change that it's going to have. But people will play this again, because not many people are going to be playing Cascade Beanstalk. They'll likely adapt their list to bring in Ren and 6. Violent Outburst is still going to be a very big problem in the modern format, in my opinion. And Violent Outburst specifically, I think, is the problem because it allows you to go off at instant speed. If we ban Violent Outburst and played a card like Ardent Plea is just blue, white, and 1 for an enchantment with Cascade, and then gives your creatures another ability where you gain +1 whatever if it's the only attacker. If we did that, then the deck can only go off at sorcery speed, which is really important, because then your spells matter more. Force of Negation is a much more powerful tool against this deck, and their Force of Negation becomes a lot less useful. I think the combo deck still stays around, it's still powerful, but then it needs to find other ways to answer the winning threat that it's trying to go with. The Rhinos deck, I think, gets hit the most with it, because I mean, Living End can come back, and then, you know, you essentially have a win if you're allowed to untap. But Rhinos is kind of just 2 4/4s. You can't really win with that. You need to have a bigger mid-range plan. So Violent Outburst getting banned, I think, is a good decision to help deal with the combo matchups for a lot of the metagame. And I think ultimately Murktide is going to be at the top of the roost. Murktide is just going to be the best deck in the modern format, like it was before. And I think that's largely okay if a tempo mid-range fair deck that's just looking to use high advantage spells to get you out of the game. I think that's okay. We just have to play more efficient removal. We're still going to see Solitude for that doesn't get spell pierced, and we're still going to see potentially other cards like Path to Exile maybe come back or whatever it might be. Just efficient, cheap removal is the best way to interact with this deck in a deck full of spell pierces. So we're definitely going to see a rise still in the elementals because it doesn't solve that problem, but Murktide being at the top of the roost is relatively okay in my opinion, compared to Scam being at the top, but that's still pending, depending on if Scam does really see that big of a kick down, unless we address the rest of the Modern metagame. Now, from this point forward, I've addressed Modern as a mill channel, as a Modern channel. I do want to address how this affects mill. So for those of you who have watched this far, thank you for enjoying the general Modern content, but let's talk about how this affects mill as an archetype. Now, largely speaking, Tasha's gets good again. In my opinion, Tasha's hasn't been good for a while and no one has wanted to admit it. I get it. There are many players out there still doing 5-0, still doing really well with the list, and that's fine. I just don't think net Tasha's is good. You are playing Tasha's Hideous Laughter into a general league format or a likely equivalent to maybe a paper format where people play one deck at a time. They don't diversify. The leagues are very open, but in the winners metagame, in the challenges, in big events like that, there's a reason you're not seeing mill. It's because a card like Tasha's Hideous Laughter is not good. It's not good in a highly competitive level. It's good in a league sense. It's good in a paper Magic sense at your local game store. You go for your Friday Night Magic or whatever. It's fine there. But Tasha's hasn't really been good in a while in a winners metagame. But now it is. With Scam, with Fury being at approximately 50% of decks, the average CMC of a deck going down by, well, not average, but just the CMC of a deck going down by 20 across the board, probably going down, shifting by like 10, maybe like 8 or whatever, based on what replaces it. It's going to be nice to see in terms of numbers for Tasha's. And that's just going to be a net positive there. Hedron Crabs are going to see a big boost because Fury coming down, dealing 4 damage separated as they want. Eliminating 2 Hedron Crabs was very important, so we're going to see a lot more sticking power of our crabs themselves against this kind of mid-range matchups like that. The Omnath matchups, a lot of those matchups actually have a really hard time with mill unless they find a very few key specific cards, especially with the One Ring coming down, not stopping Ruin Crabs or Fractured Sanity. The deck can really struggle unless they see cards like Endurance. So there are big plus points to have when it comes to Hedron Crab. And then finally, Jace, the Perfected Mind, gets a lot more sticking power. Fury was one of the few answers across the format that they had against Jace. Sometimes you just slam this, you uptick on the single creature they have, and you're swinging. You untap with this card, you're doing mad damage. So it's great that a card like Jace can survive, especially behind the protection of something like an Ensnaring Bridge. Finally, with the primary card disadvantage deck in the format, something like Scam seeing a big tick down, Surgical Extraction is going to see a big comeback, especially if the Murktide lists go up. You may want to keep Surgical for that turn 1 or that game 1 win where you Surgical the Murktide out and then you Tasha's them. So Surgical is going to see a big boost there. And then also with the Cascade deck still running around, in my prediction, I don't think they'll touch anything out of Cascade. Surgical Extraction is still going to be your best way to deal with that deck in the game 1 sense. Sometimes it's very hard to steal those games. You have to rely on Spell Pierces if you don't have Surgical Extraction. But cards like this is going to see big bonus forward if decks aren't trying to, well, if they're trying to be as efficient as possible, that's fine when it comes to Surgical Extraction because sometimes they give you windows of opening to be as greedy as you want. Whereas decks that want to play fair, quote unquote, and drown you in card disadvantage versus drown you in card advantage, the disadvantage portion being lowered is great for Surgical Extraction because it is a form of card disadvantage and we don't want to exacerbate what they're trying to do to us. If they're trying to give themselves card advantage, that's fine. We can take advantage of those windows with Surgical Extraction, so that's great. Mill is going to see a huge boost forward. But with that in mind, let me know what you think in the comment section down below. Let me know what you think is going to change on the Monday banned and restricted announcement. What are we going to see banned on Monday? Do you have big predictions for Golgari Grave Troll being unbanned in the modern format? Let me know what you think as I leave you with this meme. Let me know what you think about the Pioneer format changing, potentially any changes to the Legacy format, whatever it might be. I want to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And I am excited for one last week, hopefully, of the Scam Menace.